it is fundamentally interesting and compelling to listen to someone or to watch them be enthusiastic about a thing they love. And so I grew up in a time where like nerdy and geeky were sort of like being reclaimed, you know, in the late 90s, but not quite as mainstream as they are now. And so I would argue that like everyone's interested in something. I don't think it's a particularly weird thing to be like, wow, when you really explain it to me, like this sport or this, you know, topic or this piece of factoid from history is really fascinating.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Podcast Life. I'm Deanna Chapman, and today I am joined by Amanda McLoughlin, and we are talking about podcast collectives because I feel like a lot of people have talked about podcast networks. I know I have in a solo episode previously, but Amanda, can you tell the audience what exactly a podcast collective is?
Absolutely. A podcast collective is a bunch of independent podcasts banding together to share resources, give mutual support, and flourish together. Unlike a network, in a collective, there is no centralized editorial control and no ownership over the member show's intellectual property. So for Multitude, for example, we were started in 2018. We're a podcast collective of a bunch of really fascinating, well-researched conversational and educational podcasts. And we are all about helping audiences find new shows that bring the same level of humor and rigor and welcoming tone to brand new subjects. So the only financial relationship that exists between Multitude and our member shows, of which I am the host and co-owner of a couple, is the commission we take on ad sales. So together we can sell ads more effectively, cross-promote each other's shows more effectively, and also just look more professional and look like a bigger fish in this world of podcasting.
Yeah, I personally only have experience with podcast networks, and I know that while they also take a percentage of the ad sales, which is very standard for anyone who is selling ads on behalf of someone else. One thing I noticed with the podcast networks is that they would also charge hosting back to the podcasts, or they would then hire a third party to do the ad sales. So then it was like things were getting a cut of a cut and so on. So with a podcast collective, it sounds like it is way more focused on building community instead of just building a network of shows. Because another thing that I have learned from my experience with podcast networks is that even though there can be a lot of similar shows on a network, sometimes some networks are so big that it's like they have business podcasts, they have history podcasts, and it isn't necessarily stuff that meshes super well together. So the opportunities are just sort of different. With your podcast collective, how would you say you go about building a different type of community?
Totally. So this is the purview of Eric Silver, our head of development, whose job it is to start new partnerships and relationships with people outside the collective. And sometimes that means assessing shows to come in. Last year, we launched our Open Doors program, which is where anybody out in the world can submit their podcast for consideration to join the Multitude Collective at multitude.productions/pitches. And we read it over and only add it if we feel it is a great fit for the collective. Like you mentioned, Deanna, there are a lot of networks where they try to kind of like do a medium job across lots and lots and lots of different shows, whether that's like not doing a great job selling ads, not doing a great job supporting those shows, and not doing a great job marketing them. What really matters to us is that people have trusted the name of Multitude and what that means for going on 8 years now. And so when we introduce a new show to the collective, we know that our audience trusts that it's a rare event. Maximum, we add a couple of shows a year, and they are going to be excited to check it out. And so when we bring a member show into the collective, whether that's starting a new show from scratch or bringing in an existing podcast like we did last year with Tiny Matters and Wow If True, two excellent shows that started on their own, we know that they're really going to care, they are really going to listen, and they're going to give it a shot with us because we're not adding 30 shows a year. And we can also do a better job with the resources that we've got. We all know each other, we hang out, we play games for our community, and it is small enough that all of our listeners can know all of our shows and all of our hosts. And even if they have a favorite over another, we know that they know who Sam is or who Isabel is or who Deboki is when we talk about them. And that just means that, to put it in sort of corporate terms, our brand trust is strong and it is meaningful to our listeners.
So I want to dive in on the ads specifically because monetization is something that a lot of shows are interested in, but depending on the size of the show, you kind of have to go about that in different ways. Is there a specific way you are getting ads for the shows? Are you focused on CPM, which is cost per milli or cost per 1,000 downloads for anyone who isn't going to
Doesn't know unnecessary Latin, aka all of us.
Yeah, exactly. Or are you sort of going for some value-based sponsorships?
It's a mix. So from the very beginning, I have been the one selling our ads. Hopefully that changes this year. Fingers crossed to bring on another salesperson to help me out. But my approach has always been that our shows are worth more than the number of downloads that our podcast platform shows us. That is really a race to the bottom when you come across things like, impression-based ad sales or things like YouTube or TikTok advertising, where like, yes, in theory, you're reaching 200,000 people, but if they're just scrolling by your ad super quickly, what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. In podcasting, it's way different. Our hosts put a ton of effort and attention into the ad reads. They write them in their own voice. They care about them. They record them with real microphones, not like on speakerphone in a bathroom, which you can definitely hear when people do that. Medium shade. And so it matters to us, again, that the trust we have with the listeners means that because we select high quality sponsors, because we do those ad reads ourselves, and because we put them in front of our audience, that means something. And so our audience is way more engaged than average, and they will go ahead and check out the sponsor or the brand, the advertiser, in higher rates than usual. Something like 98% of our listeners listen to episodes all the way through. Those kinds of numbers are absolutely unheard of when you look at any amount of other digital media metrics. And so to answer your question, we do a flat rate for a number of our shows. With others, it's a price that is proportional to the audience size, but we command higher than average dollars per listener if you measure by CPM. At the same time, while we've had host-read ad sales for the last 8 years, we are also using a high-quality programmatic ad sales provider. So when we don't have host-read ads or on episodes that are older than a certain age, we have high-quality brands that are only the brands that we are allowing and none of the ones that we are not, in shady categories that we don't believe in. So while they're not read by our voice, and they certainly earn less money than the host-read ad sales because it's just a few bucks per 1,000 downloads, as you referenced earlier. We really believe in diversifying your income streams. So just like all of our shows have Patreons where members can support them directly, and all of us do host-read ad sales, we're also experimenting with those high-quality tools in a way that doesn't annoy our listeners, put too many ads on the podcast, or just throw crap in front of them.
Yeah, with the programmatic ads, that's kind of one of those downsides, especially if it's something where, not to get into the super techie side of it, but, something like Megaphone, where you just select the category and you don't really have a say over what brands are on your show. Like, you could be getting Starbucks ads, and maybe someone doesn't want a big company like Starbucks advertising on their podcast, or Amazon, or what have you. So for you, how do you approach the programmatic ads? Do you just collaborate with the host to see which brands they would be most comfortable with? And how are you implementing that on the back end? Is it through a podcast host provider?
Exactly right. So I love this level of detail in your questions. So every host sets their own comfort level with, number one, how many ads are in the show, where those ads go in the show. We always start from a perspective of where will the ads be as minimally disruptive as possible to your audience. So we don't have that thing where like you're in the middle of a sentence, then suddenly an ad gets dropped in. A lot of folks who switched over to all dynamic and all programmatic ad sales in 2019, 2021, when that tech was pretty new, did experience that. And it just chips away trust and frankly annoys your audience. So we have waited until we could find a partner that here in 2025 allows us to actually select the brands that go into our programmatic ad sales and exclude any that we don't actively choose. So every host selects their own preferences. Right now, our clients are across a bunch of different hosting platforms, but we have specific relationships with Art19 that we are really excited about that allows us to do that, like by sponsor individual selection. But listen, people are smart. Like they know that if an ad for a giant company runs on my show, if it's a company that, I don't find to be objectionable, that's okay. It's not being endorsed personally by me. Mm-hmm. And when I then do a host-read ad, ultimately it gives that more power. And so our priority is always host-read ads. That's going to be the most effective way to reach our audience and sell a product or build awareness or sell a service, whatever it is that they want us to do. And so by restricting our host-read ads to companies we really believe in, stuff we actually actually use and love. And to get to your question earlier, I always ask hosts, like, what products do you genuinely love? Who would you do a commercial for free? Let's try to get you a little bit paid to make that podcast ad. And so starting with companies that, we absolutely love is a great way to put our voice to use. And then people know that if they just hear a commercial or an ad, it's not necessarily something that I personally selected or think is great. And if you want me to select it and think it's great, you can pay for a host read ad.
Exactly. To go back to the podcast collective and shows joining up with that, you mentioned only adding a few shows a year. How much of the collective would you say is shows built from the ground up versus, like you mentioned, a couple shows had already existed and then approached you and you have the pitches link, which we will link to in the show notes. But what would you say is sort of the percentages of doing that from scratch and already existing shows joining?
It is roughly half and half. I'm looking out the studio window at our wall of podcast art. And about half and half of existing shows that we partnered with, like when the collective started, some of the existing shows that were our founding members, Spirits, which I co-host a mythology and folklore podcast, and Join the Party, where I'm a player on a Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPG actual play podcast. So those were extant beforehand. The shows WoW True and Tiny Matters were already existing when they joined, as was Exolore with Dr. Moya McTeer. But, it's been 7 years. We start new shows and we're excited about it. So our existing hosts starting new shows and then working with people whom we have collaborated with before who are starting brand new podcasts from scratch. I'm teasing that is happening soon, but not quite yet announced. We have shows like This Is Good For You with Nicole Perkins, which we created. Shows like Pale Blue Pod, Dr. McTeer's second podcast, Attach Your Resume by me and Eric Silver, our head of development, and his shows Tell Me About It and Games and Feelings were all shows where we launched them in the collective with somebody who we were already a collaborator with.
And what I've gathered, I do mean this in the nicest, most complimentary way possible, is that a lot of the shows are like very specific nerdy shows, which as a nerd, I love. And it really feels like even if you're not interested as a listener in every single show, there is sort of a show that is going to sort of scratch that itch, if you will. And one of the things I've noticed is that whether it's something fun like board games or video games, or like you said, mythology and folklore, you also have Attach Your Resume, which is more on the serious side. But just because it's about jobs doesn't mean it can't be fun. And I think that is the thing I've taken away the most from this podcast collective is it's just a bunch of people having fun making things.
Thank you. I can't take credit for any of that. I very much share it with all of my collaborators, particularly Eric, who really sets the tone and controls like the words coming in and out of the collective to make sure that they are, on message and exciting. Like the thing that all of our shows have in common, if I had to, really reduce it down, is just enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. It is fundamentally interesting and compelling to listen to someone or to watch them be enthusiastic about a thing they love. And so I grew up in a time where like nerdy and geeky were sort of like being reclaimed, in the late 90s, but not quite as mainstream as they are now. And so I would argue that like everyone's interested in something. I don't think it's a particularly weird thing to be like, wow, when you really explain it to me, like this sport or this, topic or this piece of factoid from history is really fascinating. And so we really approach every subject from a lens of, if you don't know about this yet, that's amazing because you're about to find out. And like, I'm so excited for you to learn about this thing for the first time. Pale Blue Pod is a show about space that's for people who are scared of or overwhelmed by space. And that is the really kind of like the multitude take on a subject, which is really what Eric starts with when we're deciding whether to, go forward with an idea that one of our hosts had or to admit a new show to the collective is this fun? Does this teach you something? Does this welcome you in? And is there something about specifically this being a podcast and an audio first, if not audio only podcast that really makes use of this medium, where people, give us the incredible honor of their time by showing up and spending time with us over and over again, week after week. We want to make sure that we are constantly not just showing up at the day and time we say we will, which we always do, but also leveling it up and repaying that trust and time and attention. To circle back to community, as you brought up earlier, it it matters to us. We reply to comments. We're in the Discord with our listeners. Like, we are hanging out with them, hearing how the shows we make affect their lives and vice versa. It's very much an ongoing conversation in a way that keeps this from just being like a, make a podcast, press publish, send it out into the void type situation.
Yeah. And on that listener and community note, listener support is important just beyond monetary support. It's nice to get that feedback from listeners of the show and have a dialogue going with them, which is something I've been trying to build up with this show. And for your shows, you mentioned a lot of them do have Patreons. Could you go over just some of the things that those shows are doing for their Patreon? Because I know a lot of shows will just be like, oh, here's an ad-free option. And I'm like, that's not very clever, but you're so big, it doesn't matter.
You can start there. There's nothing wrong with a Patreon that is just a single tier that says, thank you. I don't have time to make rewards, but I really appreciate it.
That's fair.
I've seen that and I've subscribed to those, and I think they're totally valid. Eric wrote a great article about setting up a Patreon for your show for the Multitude blog that I'm happy to link to you as well. And just to go over a couple of, I won't spoil the entire article, but the things I find to be of greatest note are that people really subscribe to a Patreon or similar service and membership because they either want to support you and have extra money, and God bless them, or two, they want more of what you're already making. So I subscribe to tons of Patreons for podcasts to get an extra episode each month or even each week because I love it that much and I don't want to miss out. And so thinking about, why does my podcast appeal to people and what would they want to get more of? What would they pay more for is a really useful line of thinking. So just for some of our shows, classic examples, again, as I look out of my window, for Join the Party, we have a whole other bi-weekly podcast that we make just for patrons, where in Join the Party proper, you hear us, play a game and then tell a story over the course of that game over, 30 to 60 episodes, each of which is an hour long and sound designed. It is huge and wonderful. And Eric puts so much preparation into making it. Julia and Brandon, my co-players, and I are, distilling down 2 hours of play into like an hour-ish long episode, typically maybe 70 minutes. Anyway, the point is that the Party Planning podcast is much more free-flowing. We talk about games-related topics. We play party games together. We have a series called The Conversation Pit where we just chit-chat about our lives. And it's structured. It's interesting. It has the same energy and vibe and certainly the same players and people as you like on the original podcast. But the idea is to get us whom you like in theory, talking about anything but the story that we're actually doing. And people really like that. They like to know about what we're reading and watching and listening to, and what we think about, apples and other controversial topics.
Yeah, I do love a good sort of currently consuming additional episode. I have some friends who host this podcast called Genre Vision. It's a movie podcast, and they do that just one extra episode every month. I think they'll do a currently consuming, and then they do like a pre-show where it's just the two of them and their banter before they actually start recording. And I'm like, see, that is great, because that's something you can do when you're already sitting down to record. You're not planning extra time to do this necessarily. And it's just a smart way to do something like that. Just be like, I'm talking to my friends, here you go. I've been someone who tends to do podcasts mostly on my own. I've had a couple where I've had co-hosts. One was purposefully a mini series, so I believe it was 12 or 13 episodes. And then, for me, when I was doing Welcome to Geekdom and Chat Cemetery, which was my Stephen King podcast, I was booking guests every week. I was reading 8 million pages of Stephen King books. And so doing bonus content just was really hard for me. I was like, okay, I'll do the comics. Comics are nice and short. They're easy to read. And I was like, there's only like 12 of those. What am I going to do? And I mean, I eventually caught up and just stopped doing the show. So it's always just interesting to me to see how other people are using Patreon and these listener supported platforms to just build that community. And I do want to talk specifically about Multitude as a company, though, because I know the podcast collective isn't the only aspect of Multitude. Full disclosure, you have hired me to work on some client work with Multitude in a video podcast. But what else does Multitude do from a company's perspective?
Great segue. Love a disclaimer. So thank you for putting that up top. We really see the collective as the core of our business in that it's where it started. It is almost like our portfolio. It's our original content. It's us showing you what we can do. And historically, it's where we found out all of these skills. Like I can talk confidently about what makes a good Patreon reward because I've designed many bad Patreon rewards and I've had to fulfill them and like been going to the post office and been like, oh my God, like why did I do this to myself? And so now when I say, it is great to repurpose existing work or to, for example, while I'm reviewing an edit of a podcast, or my co-host Julia will do a director's commentary, writing down extra like thoughts and observations and links for episodes of Spirits that we're putting out. She already has to listen to the episode to get the edit notes. And as she's going through, it's not extra. It's not like double the time or double the work to take those notes as she goes. Great example. Multitude as a company was originally just like a landing page and a name where we could pitch a conference or go to an event. And instead of saying, oh, well, I'm Spirits and that's Join the Party and that's Waystation and like name all the podcasts that we're working with, I can just say, go to Multitude, check it out. Like that's where all of our work is. And as soon as we really had like the trappings and the appearance of a company, people started treating us like one and saying, well, it seems like you know what you're doing in this space. Can you help us market a podcast that used to be, just on the radio, but now there's a podcast version. We don't know what we're doing. Can you come speak at this event? Can you come, do this amount of consulting? And so that is where the second part of our business, the Multitude Productions, really started. So we've done everything from making, like pitching, making, and publishing big shows for companies like Sony Music and Netflix, to editing ongoing podcasts each week, where you came in, where we had to expand our roster of folks who can edit video, which was very exciting. And so we're helping a company that otherwise like knows exactly what they're doing, doesn't have the bandwidth to edit and make the podcast themselves, and wants to work with people who know what a successful video podcast would look like. And so that is where you come in. So right now for Multitude, Eric and I like to say that we're sort of part-time podcasters, full-time running a podcast business. And so most of my week is spent doing ad sales for not just the Multitude Collective, but also the additional like 10 to 15 podcasts we represent for ad sales at any given time. Managing the production department where Brandon Grugel, Misha Stanton, yourself, Bray, and Bren, and a number of other editors work on client shows. And then there's consulting and other services. If you want help, like launching a Patreon, learning how to podcast, we can take you from idea to podcast pilot, all in like a 6-week process. So we have a lot of ways, basically anything to do with podcasting we can help you with, including operating a lovely studio here in North Brooklyn, where I am recording this, where we can help you record your audio or video podcast. So a lot going on, but it's fun. And at the same time, we get to make and host podcasts, which is the dream.
Yeah. And it's great that you have that dual purpose space because you can make money from it by having other people come in and film there. But then you also just get to use it for your own projects. And that's kind of like the ultimate goal there.
Exactly. And anyone in the Multitude Collective can use our studio for free. Not everyone is in New York City, but most of us come through, once a year or so. But it's great to have a physical space. We opened it in early 2019 and then had just finished the studio and published a blog post about how we're open for business in December 2019. So, we didn't quite have the first couple of years that I expected, but we have done incredible things here, including like record my 90s playlist for Sony Music. We recorded a full union theater and TV cast sitcom that Eric wrote called Next Stop, also January 2020. And it was incredible. So it's amazing to have the space and to also be able to host like events and meetups and networking opportunities for other podcasters in New York City.
Yeah, that's a great local resource, as well as your website, which has a ton of great resources on it. I frequently go to reference it because I'm like,
thank you.
This exists. And I think it's on Multitude's website.
We're actually refreshing the look right now. So one day soon you'll log in and be like, ooh, more white space.
Great. And I know this is everyone's absolute favorite question when they run a company. what does the future of Multitude, both on the production side and the collective side, look like? You don't have to do like 5 years or anything like that. Just what you're envisioning for the company going forward.
No, I genuinely like this question. If you're not excited about the future of what your business is doing, you probably shouldn't be running a business. And I say that lovingly to like even myself a few years ago, where I think I was very heads down focused on like what we are doing right now, what we can improve in the minute, and not necessarily the long-term vision. I really credit Eric Silver and Brandon Grugel, my two real like founding, C-suite partners. We call each other the three-legged stool, because Eric in the sort of like development and creative silo, Brandon in the production silo, and me in the operational and financial silo, really trust each other to like make decisions and to guide us in a good direction. And so I very much want to say none of this future vision that I am setting out is mine alone. We co-author it together along with all of the hosts and workers that are under the Multitude umbrella. So that being said, I am so optimistic and excited about the future of online communities, particularly small and medium-sized ones. I'm someone who has always like found their people when I couldn't in real life online, and more that is crucial and important and like sociologically and economically and politically useful and valid to find people who we can work with and be in community with, not just restricted to our geographical area. So helping more podcasters to make and form strong communities, helping people sustain themselves and make livings online in a way that doesn't depend on like a major company deciding to like lay you off or not, or to, pivot, especially in media. There's so much turnover and so much kind of corporate malfeasance as like tech companies buy and sell newspapers and like all kinds of stuff. I want to, on the one hand, be a great place to work for creative people to get paid fairly for their skills. And second, be a source of, trust, knowledge, and community for many, many different kinds of people online, whether you bond over your love of like Sonic the Hedgehog in a weird melty format and you listen to Big Game Hunger and it's, a fantastic 45 minutes where you learn more about video games and media and what you think about the world and laugh, or whether you're somebody who wants to do this work and listens to Attach Your Resume to hear Eric and me interview people that we admire in digital media about like how they got there with their jobs. What that means in sort of like business form is more clients of small and medium sizes. We really excel at helping people publish weekly podcasts that make community happen. And I'm learning more and more that it's pretty rare for companies or editors, we were talking a little bit before the show, being able to publish a like daily or twice weekly or weekly podcast. Like it's a lot of work. We do it very well. I know we can do it for others. And so just keep continuing to expand our reach and help people make smart choices about advertising that honor their audience and the trust that they've built together. So we have some, big new clients coming on this year. Like I said, the Art19 partnership, very excited about, because we're able to actually opt in and out of individual programmatic companies. Mm-hmm. Huge. And so just really going, for me, this is a sort of like moving from elementary school to middle school kind of year, where, we've been around 7 years. A lot of stuff that used to be in a Google sheet is now in an Airtable. A lot of stuff that used to be like, something I did a couple hours a week is now someone's job. So we're in the, exciting place of being able to like really specialize, step up, and let our employees and partners like run in the areas they're stoked about.
Yeah, the long-term thing is something I've always struggled with. And, as a freelancer, it can get very hectic with the ups and downs. Like I know every year December is going to be a mad dash to get everyone's 3 weeks of podcasts in before the holidays. Mm-hmm. And then it'll take everyone so long to get back to me about anything in January. So it's just like ups and downs all over the place. And so for me personally, it's kind of been hard to look at that long-term view because I'm like, I don't even know what's happening next week right now.
Yeah, no, it's so hard. It really is. And like, that is why, like I say, I want to be a good place to work. Mm-hmm. Because when you're a freelancer, there is no safety net. If you are sick, your company is closed. If, you want to take a holiday or a vacation, your company needs to do double the work for weeks in advance and probably double the work after you come home to catch up. up, that sucks. And so like last year we were able to, hire our senior audio editor, Misha Stanton, from part-time to full-time for exactly some of those reasons. And to say like, no matter what our individual employees are doing, the company can be here. Eric and I were able to, who we're married, by the way, we were able to take a vacation this year and like be mostly offline for like 6 days, I think for the first time in the history of the company. It was very exciting to be able to know that other people have our back. And that really is the broader mission, or one of them, for Multitude, is just being a collection of colleagues who you can turn to for help, but who aren't breathing down your neck. And I spend so much time thinking about and trying to improve what it's like to work here and what it's like to be served by Multitude as a client, as a podcast. And I hope to do even better and get, rave reviews in the future.
Yeah. And I'm in that sticky spot where I work on current events podcasts, so they can't necessarily record in advance. We do for the holiday weeks, because then we'll typically do interviews that aren't about like the things that are happening right in this moment. Because, Congress closes down for 18 weeks out of the year. I don't know what they do still, but
me neither.
But it's one of those things where like sometimes I just have to work through being sick for those podcasts, and then I will just take the rest of the day off, and then I'll just communicate with everyone else and be like, hey, everything's still going to get out on time, but please don't ask me for anything today.
And to be clear, that is not a personal problem. That is a societal level problem. Yes. Where we ought to have, at least you and I are both in the U.S., we ought to have any amount of basic worker protections, healthcare, all of these things. I am very much like putting Band-Aids on a broken ship out here, but I think it's important that we keep talking and thinking about that. And again, I think there's a lot of credit due to listeners where they understand that this stuff is hard and they appreciate when you do come out consistently. And our listeners are among, I think, the greatest in the game, because they'll say things like, be kind to yourself, like, we understand. And so there really is this like this social contract in the most like philosophy and debate 101 sense, where we show up for you every week and give you something worth listening to. And we know that they are going to show up in return. And really just like working for the benefit of that relationship together feels so much more sustainable and enriching and creative than being like, oh shit, like I got to publish another thing this week. It's just, it's a huge difference. And I'm grateful that, 7-8 years into this journey, we're able to be, refining that and helping each other. And we're not in the days any longer where Julia and I would record for 2 or 3 hours after work in my apartment before she commuted home, because we both had day jobs.
Yeah. I started podcasting when I had a day job as well. And now I guess my day job is podcasts. So
there you go.
Things have shifted a bit. But for me with this show, because I knew I was going to be doing the video component to it, which a lot of shows are doing now, especially ones that are interview based, or, I know a lot of people will go into a studio like yours and just have a conversation. And for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to alternate interview and solo episodes, but I don't think I can do a video podcast on top of all of my freelance work weekly. So it's every other week for now, which kind of drives me crazy, because I did 300 episodes of Welcome to Geekdom and well over 100 episodes of the Stephen King podcast. He has written so many things have been adapted. And those were both weekly. And at one point, I was doing both of them every week.
A lot, Deanna. Would you do that again?
No, I absolutely would not. To be fair, I was doing it at a time when I didn't have as much freelance work as I did now. So they started as hobbies because I didn't really have anything else to do. And it just kind of all snowballed from there with me and podcasts. But with this, I was like, okay, what is the best way I can keep this consistent and know that I will be able to get episodes out on the day I say I'm going to? And I also have a newsletter that comes out the day after each episode drops with some bonus content. So heads up for anyone who wants to sign up for that. There's a link in the description. But for Multitude, it sounds like you've really just fostered this community. And I'm not saying this just because you're on the podcast, but I have really enjoyed working with your company, because there's just an ease of communication that I don't necessarily get with everyone who wants to start a podcast. And obviously I am not interacting with the clients directly, so you might have a slightly different experience than I do on that front. But just being open to that communication and being like, hey, is this a reasonable turnaround time for this? Is this something we need to like go back and tell the clients, hey, like we'll need an extra day or two? Just small stuff like that is just so helpful.
I think it really matters when you've been there. Like I, have paid my bills with freelancer income. Everybody who works at our company has at one time or another. And so it's not like a theoretical thing. It's, oh no, if we're going to do this job, we're going to do it right. If we are going to work with a client, something that I have tried really hard to get better at over the last few years is saying what I'm not good at, saying what I won't do, saying like, this might not be a good fit if you expect A, B, C, or D. We will tell people now, like, I don't think we're the best fit for you, or that budget is not reasonable. Whereas 5 years ago, that would have made me break out in hives. Number one, because I really wanted, like, I felt lucky for every email that came in the door. I felt lucky for every person who wanted to work with me. And really a lot of credit again due to Eric. You can tell this, this is really a theme here, because I was like, oh God, like we should like get any work that we can, like it's, I don't want to like piss them off. And he's like, well, like, why are we doing this? Why are we making the difficult decision to work on our own if it's not going to be on our own terms and for our own purpose? And ultimately for me, it's a lot easier to say to a client, if I need to, that, we're going to need more deadlines, more clarity, more resources from you if you want us to make this show the way you want to, because my workers don't deserve that. Because my colleagues, if they're going to do a good job, need X, Y, and Z to do a good job at it, which is, the role ideally of someone who is client facing or who is in management. So that makes me very happy to hear. I'm trying to get better at it all the time. And I think, being specific and clear just about like what my vision is, how we can set each other up to work successfully, means that it is like a win-win all around. And so we try to, apply that like transparency and communication and, process management to all of our client relationships. And again, like huge ups to Brandon, who manages that department. And, you, Misha, Bren, all of the editors who work on being great at communicating.
Yeah, it's one of those things that has also taken me a lot of time too, because I was always just say yes to everything because it's work. And I've now hit the point where recently I've taken some stuff on that isn't editing. It's like social media or like running reports on the analytics. And I've just kind of hit the point where I'm like, oh, I don't ever want to do some of those things again. And now I have to figure out how to communicate that to the people I'm doing those things for. But thank you so much for joining me to explain what podcast collectives are and letting everyone know more about what Multitude does as a company.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I am, again, one of several other more incredible people who work at Multitude. So go to multitude.productions to learn more about us and what we do, and look at us on social at Multitude Shows, where, hey, video is great for cutting social clips. You can see beautiful clips of lots of our shows, and that's a good use of video.
Yes, exactly.